To introduce you to Sarah Hatton, a painter who is inspired in many ways by both the present and the past. Sarah, your work is very expressionistic almost, I would say, and it apparently comes in part from your interest in looking at archival images. Tell us about that.
Well, I've always worked with archival imagery in some way, whether it's from my own personal archives that are fairly new or more general archives from the Canadian collection. I started out looking early in my career at different historical periods, and things would jump out at me that were interesting, and I'd try and interpret them using my own techniques. But recently I've really started to pull in a lot of my own family history, my personal thoughts, and put them together.
I remember one of your early series was actually about fires. So you picked a series, but it was very dramatic. All sorts of imagery around major fires that have occurred in different places. And you seem to like to kind of just focus right in on a detail, an important storytelling detail. So tell me what you did in the fire series.
Well, a lot of people think, how do you go from fires to portraiture? But there's always an aspect that hooks me whenever I find a new series to talk about. And that is that in something terrible, I always find something positive or beautiful, and the other way around too. In something beautiful, I can often pinpoint something quite nasty. Yeah. And I like the balance that creates in my work. There's this pendulum that people tend to recognize, but they don't quite know why. So with the fires, I was looking at events that were quite destructive to certain communities, very specific communities. But I also brought in floral imagery in the background. It was just coming out, flowers that thrived after fires. So there was always some aspect of renewal or positive growth.
Yeah. And when you do look at things that are really positive, like children, in fact, I've noticed you are able to identify the way in which we have looked at children and children's activities in the past, and you think they are very telling, very speaking of attitudes toward children. Tell me about that.
I've done a variety of series on children that have been placed in situations that were beyond their control, and that's always spoken to me. So it's one of those things where there's these beautiful kids and everyone relates to the images of the children, but then there's something darker there as well. So the first series that I really got attention for in Ottawa was 4 small paintings of the Dion quintuplets. And people saw these 5 girls in their colorful dresses, and then they saw the fence behind them, and then they saw that the kids were all exactly the same, and that was the hard part that they would identify in the work.
In fact, they would recognize that they had been put on display, and that they actually were being, in a sense, not allowed to live their lives freely because they were being used to give heart to people in the Depression. They were being used.
They were a spectacle.
They were a spectacle. They were a spectacle.
But I always try to talk, I don't just try to show this and not add anything to it. I always try to bring my own technique in to say something about that. And in the case of the Dion quintuplets paintings, I portrayed the quints, but I used melted crayons to do all the colors in the. I'm always finding something in the technique that will speak to what it is to be a kid, a real kid, and not just on display.
You use very different techniques too, I think. Can you tell me some of your new inventive techniques?
I've used a lot for different things. It has to be relevant to the subject matter. For the fires, I used volcanic earth in the, volcanic sand. And I used a lot of carving, so things that actually marked up the wood that I painted on. For the quintuplets, it was crayons, and it was sparkle pens and things that little girls play with, but these girls obviously wouldn't have. I did a series on pageant girls, and I used real nail polish in their nails and
wonderful.
Used makeup on their eyes, but I tried to show them as vulnerable children as opposed to the adult face that they are given.
Yeah. But you have done one series, which is one done straight out of love, and that's the one for your daughter. Tell me about that.
This was one I did in 2010, and it was a series called Bear. And what I wanted to do was just a pure portraiture series of a young girl as she is before she started to get all of these body image questions happening that they start earlier and earlier every year. So what I decided to do was, in my usual style of portraits on wood with just minimal paint, I showed her in various nude portraits positions. And my intention with Bear was to strip away all the context. So I didn't include any kind of background. It's just white and her. And I even made her less recognizable than I normally do, just to make sure that it's more, this is me doing a series of nudes of a child.
But I remember that one of them really got you a little bit of reaction from the public. I think that we've become so sensitive now to the whole idea of children who are unclothed and what that might mean that's negative as opposed to what's positive, that you ended up finding yourself on the end of criticism. What did you think about that when people said that you were exploiting your child?
Well, I think that you go into a series like Bear knowing that there is going to be some criticism, but you anticipate the criticism and you make sure that before you show the work, you've covered the bases. You know, you've thought of the questions that are going to come forward. One of them was, you know, are you allowed to paint portraits of nude children? Of course, art history is full of portraits of nude children. So I was thinking, what is it that really gets people about this particular series? And again, I think it's the Bear aspect, that I've taken away all of those little comfort zone things that people rely on to say this is not a child that's in distress. You know, there's no cherub wings on her, there's no halo, she's not in a fountain, there's no wading pool. People just have to react to the fact that she's there. And I think when you take away the easy answers, people are forced, which I personally like, to come to their own conclusion, but that's when people get uncomfortable.
And I notice as well that you use a style which is almost confrontational, in the sense that you pick a detail and you blow it up very large, so that it could be something small in life, but suddenly it's giant on the board or on the surface that you're using, so that it's inescapable. It just hits you in the face. So there's this contrast between something that is perhaps a child, or a detail of a child, like the portrait of your daughter, which is usually considered fragile and small and helpless, and it's suddenly bigger than you are and forcing you to see it in a different way. Is that part of the impact that you want to have?
Definitely, yeah. There's always, in a face, in a portrait, there's something you want to emphasize in particular, and with my daughter Stella, it's the eyes. Everything is hidden in her eyes, and I wanted to do that. But with portraits of children, I also like to enlarge them to a bigger than life scale, because then it shrinks the viewer. It makes them see you on the same scale as the child, for one. It's theatrical, it gives them a drama that I like. And it also reminds the viewer that it's a painting, that it's not a photograph, that you're looking at something that I've made.
And so how long have you had this kind of style or interest in making this kind of impact on the public? Is it something that you even had as a student? Where did you do your work as a student?
I did my BFA at Queen's, and then I did my MFA at University of Calgary. And I think I've always liked to look beyond just the painting's surface and look at how you can arrange paintings or how you can scale paintings to make your statement too. I did one series that was intended to be directed towards children to look at, and I hung them at almost hip height so that it was for kids. And you'd have to bend down to look at it, and it would force you into that role. So, yeah, I do like to move people around a bit.
And is that something that you started young with, I guess? And And what are you working on now? Tell me about that.
Well, I like to jump from subject to subject, again, when things sort of cry out to me with that mix between light and dark. But I'm putting the two together, portraits and landscape work, more into pictures of memories of my own surroundings. It's more of a personal archive movement now.
Yeah, you do landscape as well. And I think you were able to develop a friendship with Robert Hindman.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, we both reside in Chelsea now, which is a beautiful art community on the Gatineau River. And when I got my first big break with the Dion Quintuplets series, I got this call out of the blue from the Chelsea phone book. He'd seen my face in the paper, and he looked me up and called me, and this was totally new to me, that somebody would do that, very old school. And he just wanted to encourage my painting. He said he was really impressed, and that made such a big difference to me as a young artist starting out that I started writing to him, and then we started hanging out and talking about painting, and
you've done his
friends
portrait as well, I think. And so do you do portraits regularly apart from your family and your children?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong commission practice as well, which is ongoing. And my portrait of Robert Heinman was the oldest subject I've ever had work with me. He was 94 at the time, and my youngest was 11 months old.
Oh my, oh goodness. But there must be clients in between who are apt to say to you, here's what I want, and to try and give you some direction. How do you respond as an artist? How do you balance that business of a client who has certain desires and your own needs as an artist?
Oh, a lot of people avoid commissions because of that. And I really enjoy commissions because of the end result, where you can give something back to somebody and you see their face hopefully respond positively. Usually people approach me knowing my work, so they know that it's not going to be this kind of Sears portrait, very formal and tense kind of a picture. I do a lot of siblings, and usually I'll have them moving or doing something that's not quite still, and people like the dynamism, and they say that the personality really comes out that way.
And so what are you doing now? Tell me about your project that you're going to go home right now and you're going to work on.
I'm documenting. I'm taking the summer off to get more source imagery, and then I'm going to, I think, process it. And I always have to put a little bit of space behind so that the nostalgia can kind of grow and feed me. And then over the winter time, I paint. Oh,
that's interesting that you need the distance, so that you're not the kind of painter who sort of sits herself in front of a landscape and just paints the landscape. You actually need to have that distance. Do you do photographs yourself and then give yourself that same?
Yeah, quality? So it's a summer of fact-finding and inspiration, and spending time outside with Stella, and then off to the studio I go, and the commissions.
Well, that sounds like an idyllic summer. I hope you have a wonderful summer, and thank you for coming in.
Thanks a lot.